Good evening all, and welcome. Getting behind the wheel and going for a drive to somewhere new is a very fun thing to do, but it can lead to some rather dark and unpleasant situations, which you're about to find out. If you're new to the channel or have just found it, don't forget to subscribe for new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And be sure to check out our app, with over 2,500 extra stories for you to listen to. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Hit the like button and let the darkness take control. When I was about 17, me and a few of my friends used to drive out to Union Cemetery in eastern Connecticut to do some late-night ghost hunting. We'd walk around and take photos, never really captured anything too amazing. If you haven't been to that part of Connecticut, the roads are very long and windy. It's deep in the middle of the woods, where there are no streetlights and houses are like a mile or two apart from each other. The road to the cemetery itself is probably about 10 to 15 miles single-lane road with just a few creepy-looking rundown houses. The drive alone is enough to creep you out enough to the point where you wouldn't want to set foot in the cemetery. So anyway, me and two of my friends were on this one trip up. We were heading down the road to the cemetery at 2 in the morning when this car comes up behind us out of nowhere and starts riding dangerously close behind me, to the point where I couldn't even see his headlights in the rearview mirror. We slow down, thinking it's a cop or something. It's hard to see and we can't make out anyone behind the wheel. They slow down and keep almost the exact distance. We sped up again. Still keeps the same distance. Didn't think much about it at this point, maybe just some asshole driver in a hurry or something. So we finally get to the cemetery. We didn't want to be seen pulling into the cemetery that late at night, so just past is a rotary with 2 other roads that cross paths. So we decide to pass the cemetery and go through the rotary to turn around and come back. As we approach it, we go around once and the car follows. We go around a second time, the car follows again. Now we're starting to freak out. The third, fourth, and fifth time around, the car is still behind us. We can finally see that it's an older car, late 80s or early 90s Corolla or something, but we still can't make out the driver. I finally said screw it, pulled off at a random point in the rotary and just started driving as fast as I could. He still followed us at this point, and we're about 50 or 60 feet ahead of him, and I see him flip off his headlights. Now, remind you there are no streetlights on this road. It's pitch black. I'm doing 45 to 50 at this point and we think we lost him. When about a minute later his headlights come back on and he's right behind us again. Then his headlights go out, about 20 seconds or so, and he comes back. He's 15 feet behind us. He does this about 3 or 4 times. Finally, I slam on the brakes and pretty much come to a dead stop and he's about 10 feet back from us. His headlights go on again, and this time I floor it and get up to about 60. His headlights come on again, and I see that he's pretty far away this time and for some reason think to pull into the first driveway I see. So we take a right up a very narrow driveway and we just sit and wait. No car passes. My heart's pounding like crazy, and I'm getting ready to get out and start running towards the house, but nothing ever happened. No car ever passed us, and we were finally getting the nerve to pull out the driveway about 10 minutes later. And there's no sign of the mysterious driver. So we decided to not go to the cemetery that night. A couple of years back, some friends and I decided to take a couple of weeks off and go on a road trip. Our goal was to drive through the states from the southeast up to Pennsylvania and back. We would drive through the night and pitch our tents before dusk, sleep a little, and spend the day checking out the area we stopped in. Sometimes it would be out in the middle of nowhere, sometimes near a city. It was interesting to do things that way. We were driving through Alabama when we made our stop. Thing about Alabama is the interstate through it is incredibly boring, pretty much straight and a lot of trees. We knew this in advance, so we charted a path through that would make us drive through the more rural areas. We got about 3/4 of the way through, from south to north, when we decided to stop for the morning. We found a large patch of field that didn't have a no trespassing sign visible and set up camp. Since we took turns driving, the rest of us took naps in the car. When we stopped to camp, it was mostly to rest the car. It was mostly to be able to take a nap without being cramped together or have someone else drool on you. It was about noon when everyone was ready to pack up and explore. The spot we camped in was a beautiful short grass field about 500 or so feet from where we chilled was a barn. It looked new and was really picturesque. We packed everything back into the car and decided to hoof it over to the barn and check it out. Everyone took off in different directions when we got to look around. I happened to be on the side. I was poking around the tall grass that had started to conceal some equipment when I heard one of my friends yelling. I walked into the barn, and the others had already joined my loud friend. They were standing around what looked to be a trapdoor on the floor near the back of the barn. My friend tells me she heard crying, and when she found the trapdoor it stopped. We all stood there for a minute in silence listening. All we heard was the wind blowing through the barn. I look up and start to say something when out of nowhere there's a large crash. It sounded like something slammed up against the other side of the trapdoor. Everyone booked it without a second glance except me. I couldn't move. My legs didn't work. I just stood there staring at the door in wide-eyed terror. My brain was screaming for me to run, begging my legs to move, and I couldn't. Then, like a rubber band snapping into place, my body spun 180 degrees in the opposite direction. After what felt like an eternity, my legs decided to act. Just as I felt my legs start to push off, the world went black. Pitch black. It looked like and felt like someone threw a heavy blanket over me. Then the screaming started. It sounded like a young child was screaming at the top of their lungs. It never stopped. There was no pause for breath. I think I screamed. I say I think because I couldn't hear myself screaming over the child's scream. I felt something icy cold in my chest and started having trouble breathing. It felt like something grabbed my heart. Primal survival instincts kicked in, and I began to thrash my arms around, hoping to hit something, anything that would make it stop. It didn't help. I gathered as much strength left and forced myself to run. I didn't know where I was, and it didn't matter. I just had to run. And I did. Full speed straight into a low-hanging beam. I was down and out. I don't know how long, though. I remember waking up in the grass near my car. My left eye was sealed shut from dried blood. Everyone was sitting next to the car, not talking. When they noticed I woke up, they helped me get cleaned up. I used a bottle of water to clean the blood off my face and bandages from the first aid kit to cover the huge gash in my forehead. I asked what happened, and they told me that they had made it to the car when they realized I wasn't with them. Of course, since it was my car, I had the keys, so they were looking out. That's when they heard me screaming. They actually told me they were thinking of running to town to get the police instead of going back for me. I never asked them why they decided to come back for me. I'm just glad they did. They told me when they found me, I was lying on the floor bleeding. The trap door was wide open, and they actually dragged me across the floor by my feet because no one would come around the other side of me and have their back to the door. Here's the kicker. After the explanation of all of this, one of them tells me to turn around and check out the barn. I look behind me, and the beautiful barn that we saw and went to investigate was now decrepit and old. I looked back at my friends and they stared back at me with blank expressions without saying anything else. I hand my keys to one of my friends and drive off. We didn't camp out like that again for the rest of the trip. We found campgrounds to stay at or just slept in the car. None of us have ever mentioned the incident since. This story took place in the 70s. My father's friend is a forest ranger who also happens to be a competitive pistol shooter, like who can hit the most targets the fastest sort of thing. He is driving with his wife, playing car poker with a local car club. Basically, the group comes up with objectives, generally places to drive to, and you're awarded a card for accomplishing them. The goal, of course, is to get the best hand. All of these objectives are completed over the weekend, and all done individually. That is, the drivers go their own way. This is not a caravan. So he and his wife were driving their convertible, I think it's a Triumph, along the back roads of western Washington near Concrete. They come around a bend in the road, and a large pickup dragging a good-sized log comes tearing out perpendicular to the road, so that the log is now blocking their path. Putting the car in reverse and looking behind them, the husband sees another truck do the same thing, effectively boxing him and his wife in. Each pickup bed is occupied by 3 or 4 rednecks, one of whom has a shotgun. One of the rednecks, clearly the leader, jumps down from the bed and walks over to the car. It being a nice day, the windows are already down. The redneck leader leans into the car and leers at the man's wife. "It's a fine-looking woman you got there." The husband's pulse races. Being a competitive shooter and a forest ranger, technically a peace offering, the husband carries a pistol under the seat of his car. While the leader of the redneck bandits walks up to the car, the husband slowly reaches under his seat and pulled up his revolver and concealed it under his legs. As soon as he heard the leader imply that these men were going to rape his wife, he grabbed the leader by the collar and pulled the pistol to his forehead. "You'll have to move that log in front of us or I'm going to blow your head off." The leader went silent for a moment, the calculations running in his head. The leader said, "You can't get all of us." "Sure, but you'll be dead." Self-preservation rolling the day, the leader motioned for the front log to be moved. The husband drove slowly forward, keeping hold of the leader's collar until he was clear of the obstacle. He made it past and got the hell out of there. This next story is one of my personal favorites to share, since everything turned out alright, but I still get chills thinking about how many different ways the night could have gone wrong. Allow me to elaborate. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was feeling pretty jaded with the city. She was convinced everything was better on the West Coast, including the people. So we flew out to Portland and rented a car, which we called Veronica. The day before we were supposed to fly back home, we took Veronica and drove up to Aberdeen, Washington, to see Kurt Cobain's childhood home. After that, we drove down the coast sightseeing along the way. We visited Astoria, Oregon to see the house from the Goonies, and ended the day at Cannon Beach to check out Haystack Rock. All in all, it was a pretty nice day. Once it started to get dark, we decided to head back to our hotel, which is just under 2 hours away. I knew that I needed gas, so I told Jane I would stop at the first gas station I saw. Cannon Beach is a small resort-type town. There are a lot of little shops and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being from the city, I'm used to seeing 2 on every corner, so I wasn't really worried. I expected to find one soon. I am completely unfamiliar with the area, so I just keep following the GPS's instructions while talking to Jane. Next thing I know, we're not in any type of town. We're on a dark, winding road surrounded by trees. At this point, I'm getting a little worried. I pull over to the side of the road and use the GPS to search for the nearest gas station. It tells me there's one about a mile down the road. Awesome. I'll get some gas and we'll be set. So I'm driving, and Veronica tells us that we arrived at our destination. I pull into a completely dark and empty gas station. We're still surrounded by woods and darkness, and as far as I can tell, there's nothing around for miles. According to Veronica, we have about 10 miles worth of gas, and the nearest gas station from here is 30 miles away. Jane and I are sitting there trying to figure out what to do, when another car pulls in. I keep going about my business and don't really pay attention to the other car, I just assume they need gas too. When out of the corner of my eye, I see someone gesturing to me. After some hesitation, I crack the window to see what they want. There's a middle-aged man and his wife in the car. He starts asking us all kinds of questions. Need to fill up? Coming from the beach? Driving back to Portland? I keep my answers polite but short. Then he tells me he actually owns the gas station we were at, but that it doesn't make enough money to keep it open that late. He tells us he knows of a Chevron about 3 miles away and gives us directions for it. He gave us his number and says to give him a call in case we don't make it to Chevron. His name was apparently Sam the mechanic, and wanted to know if we needed him to rescue us. We thanked him profusely and headed out. Jane is going on about how nice it was, and that would never happen in Chicago. I agreed, it was very nice, and says, "A lot of weirdos out here tonight." Jane and I look at each other and let out a small laugh. Ha, told you. I turn back to the kid and ask him what he means. He tells me this story how his brother owes some drug dealer a ton of money, and how he's hiding somewhere nearby. He's planning on kicking the crap out of him once he gets off his shift. I can tell Jane is getting uncomfortable with the building weirdness of the night, so I give the kid a decent tip, wish him luck, and start driving again. At one point during our conversation, Jane calls Sam the mechanic man and leaves him a voicemail. She tells him we made it to the gas station and how much we appreciate his help. I thought the call was unnecessary, but it is what it is. A few minutes later, we're on the highway, and about 10 minutes from our hotel, Jane's phone rings. It's Sam. Again, she thanks him profusely. He asks her where from and when we're flying home. He tells her his name is Sam Glesty, and he wrote a book called Wrongly Accused, and that we should read it while on our plane ride home. This piqued my interest. "Jane, you have to look the book up to see what it's about." She Googles it, and then she makes a face that looks like she's about to puke. "What is it?" "He was accused of being the Green River Killer." Immediately, she starts freaking out, because he now has her number. Back at the hotel, we do more digging. Apparently, a victim of the Green River serial killer picked Sam out of a lineup. However, the real killer was caught and convicted based on DNA evidence, but around the same time in the 70s, Sam was convicted and served time for abducting and assaulting a young woman in the area we were in. The book he wrote was all about that. We ended up stuck in Portland for 2 more days due to a snowstorm in Chicago. It was a weird, tension-filled 2 days. Considering the circumstances and weirdness of the night, things could have gone horribly wrong. I'm glad all I got out of that night was a story of a near miss. I was driving my car alone a few years back when I heard a loud voice, other than my own, in my head say, "Stop the car now." I was going 60 on the highway, but I checked my mirrors and saw that I was free to slam on my brakes. As I did, 2 cars with no headlights on came careening down the road on either side of me, going 100 plus. They then met in the middle and crashed into each other a few car lengths in front of me. If I hadn't have slowed down to almost stop, I would have certainly been a part of the mess. By the looks of it, they were racing or messing with one another, and they had no headlights on in the dark of night. They were in both lanes on either side of me, and then egged on each other a second or 2 more in front of me before they both decided to swerve in the center lane in front of me, maybe trying to fake each other out at the same time, I'm not sure. They were both sent into ditches on either side of me. I did not stop, but I saw many people in front of and behind me pull over. The adrenaline was really something. Their behavior had really freaked me out as well, so I just kept driving home. I'm sorry if that wasn't the right thing to do, but I know others did stop. To preface this, I love to drive, Long hour drives to nowhere with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities, and I'd like to usually take these drives at night, since there was much less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license for the past 4 or 5 years, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor run into any trouble of any sort. This was, until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together or sort out personal issues. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a mean of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed and anxious with a cluster of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend and couldn't focus on anything else, and decided I needed a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north, down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses I'd seen were now miles back, the road lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and were covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlight, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back towards the city, I would head back towards the city and home. The roundabout was still 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really at all concerned. I mean, I was by myself, but I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I round another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest was jutted out on the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do it. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. The cell phone reception was spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on or inside of, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was a still, small part of me that was worried something terrible had happened to whomever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads didn't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music and called out, "Hey? Anyone there? You okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything I would leave, and the moment there was reception I'd call it in, and if I did hear someone, well then I'd get to that bridge when I came to it. So I shouted again, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat. Then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah?" I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car fast. The person did not have any blood on them, nor appeared injured in any way, wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID or ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you could see being used in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, I didn't get a good enough look, but from its length and shape, my best guess would be a tire iron or a crowbar. I don't even need to say that I slammed on the gas at that very moment and drove like a bat out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me. Though I had no clue what they were saying, I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but wanted to get away from those men as quickly as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in a Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars in it from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends who was a police officer to tell him what happened, and asked what I should do. He was concerned for me after asking if I was okay, where I was, and if they followed. He told me since it was out of the city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed and thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened, not even 10 minutes or so ago. He was, as you can imagine, super freaked for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay. But I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruiser pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been to take a look, and they would try and catch the guys who did it. Though with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never came to me until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off of was guys in a dark-colored sedan wearing masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they had any leads. I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here, and that I didn't stop to get out my car, because I'm not sure what would have happened if I did. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? What was the blood on the inside of their car? Was it a ruse to get more attention? Or was it really blood? Did they hurt someone? What would have happened to me if I'd have stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any late night drives to anywhere for a while, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. To this day, I still find this story very spooky, and am still perplexed and have no idea what happened. Let me share it to you. I had a lot of work-related sites, ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up, and I hit the road to some local arrangements I'd made for the weekend. And I spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of Virginia, and got dragged off to other places even further out. The usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home to start my thankfully late afternoon on Monday. I'm fully rested, didn't do any drinking, and I'm not into drugs. On the highway about 3 a.m., in the middle of nowhere between Roanoke and DC, with absolutely no one around, I'm cruising along in the left lane, simply because no one else is near me. No headlights for the past hour, no taillights either. No road lamps, it's dark, mildly damp, it's foggy, and I've got the music on loud. I'm feeling pretty good. All is fine. And then, I just happen to look to the left, and out there I see a dog barking at me. A German Shepherd in a car passenger seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to the window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it too, because at first my brain is not registering that it's a cop car. I'm doing 95 plus in a 75 and promptly have the oh crap moment when the dog, the instrument, the White Crown Vic, the light bar, and all in my brain clicks. And after a second hard look, I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down, hard but safe, to pull over. I even put my blinkers on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over, because, wait, there's no hard shoulder on the left side of the road. I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder room for the other car, and it's just gone, without a trace. I slammed on my brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway, flipped on all my light bars, even looked around me with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No taillights, no headlights, no engine sounds, not a damn thing. There were no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I could see a nice long distance for both ways. Complete emptiness. My vehicle had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting, as an off-road SUV with all the trimmings. There is no possible way someone pulled a sneaky, let alone drive that fast on wet, slopped grass and rocks on my left side. So, yeah, Cop Ghost and his dog didn't like me speeding, apparently. My friend and I were coming back from a concert one night, and were taking a shortcut through this area that was being worked on. So there wasn't really anyone around because it was late and the streets were closed. As we're crossing this small bridge, I looked up and saw what appeared to be a zombie rat jumping at my face. Scared the hell out of me. Turns out that someone had taken a mummified rat or squirrel and used wire to position it mid-air on that bridge. The combination of that and the abandoned atmosphere of the construction area was so creepy that we ran until we hit a busy street. A few years back, I was driving on this back road between 2 or 3 a.m. after hanging out with a few friends. There was no one on the road, certainly no one walking, and it was incredibly foggy. The area here is a small protected wetland, and visibility was maybe 30 to 40 feet at best. There is a 90-degree turn. As I am turning, there's a man standing there, arms at his sides, wearing ragged clothes, just standing perfectly still, about 2 feet in the road. I nearly hit him, but was certainly closer to crapping my pants than anything else. I was doing a road trip with a friend of mine when we arrived to a town that just felt off, almost like the writers of Twin Peaks had shown up and decided to take the inspiration for their show. Anyway, we stopped there for an emergency bathroom break. We were both naive, city-dwelling 18-year-old girls. The porta potty off the freeway near some dilapidated buildings was too gross to use, so we drove up ways to the main street. The only thing open at 2 p.m. on a Thursday was a craft shop, which my friend rushed into while I waited in the car, when a giant bald man with a crazed look in his eye came barreling out of nowhere and started slapping the side of our little Fiat, yelling at me that I was too pretty not to smile. I tried texting my friend to warn her, but had no service. He circled the car a few times, acting mean and drunk, shaking the entire vehicle, and was close to breaking a window. I'm no stranger to crackheads fried out on their mind, but this felt different. He seemed to have given up and walked a few steps away. My friend came out, noticed the look on my face, and we peeled out of there. And he chased our car for a lot longer than expected. Once I had cell service again, I looked up the town, and at the time I believe it was almost 25% felons, with a population of 300. I bought a new car several months ago, and had to drive the 395 from Reno to Vegas to get it. Damn lack of dealerships in northern Nevada. The trip down was fine, but going back north was later in the day when we left, and it was dark by the time we got to Walker Lake Reservation. Late summer, pitch black at about 10 p.m., and little do we know that the lake is known for midge swarms. I thought it started sprinkling rain as we rounded the bend, but soon started pumping my windshield wash as fast as I could, as my windshield was plastered with thousands of midges in a gigantic swarm over the road. I slowed to 40 to 20 as visibility was poor at best for a good 2-mile stretch of seemingly endless bug apocalypse. I ran out of windshield wiper fluid near the end and had to drive 15 miles to the next town, barely able to see. I had my sister-in-law with me, and I'm fairly certain it was the scariest moment of both of our lives to date. Don't go to Walker Lake in summer after dark. The place apparently gets spiders so bad in the summer, bushes look like wads of webbing. Also, so much for my new car being detailed. I'm fairly certain the garage still stinks of bug after that much power washing, and there's still guts hidden in every crevice of that car. This happened a while back. I had just obtained a new car and was visiting family in Lower Alabama. I decide to go for a late-night joyride, and everything's fine until I end up in some heavily wooded, deep back roads. This super thick fog starts moving in, so thick that I can no longer confidently drive faster than 10 to 15 miles per hour, and I had to turn my headlights off and rely on fog lights. I decide I need to pull over and use Google Maps to find directions back, since I couldn't even read street signs through the fog. I find an opening in the trees besides the road and pull over. No cell service. I sit for a minute and try to see if I can remember all my turns to get back. As I'm sitting there, the fog starts to clear ever so slightly, and I see that I am parked by a church that could be as old as 200 years, and I'm parked nearly atop of the cemetery. This is the part where if this were a horror movie, I'd go into the church and see if there's someone to give me directions. Nope. I just turned around and left immediately, and eventually found my way back. Nothing paranormal happened, but I was about 95% certain something paranormal was about to. To be honest, a part of me wished I checked out that church. There's an extreme curiosity. Everything seemed to lead me there, and present the church to me. Maybe a ghost needed my help. My mum, sister, and I were on our way to a baseball game of mine during my junior year of high school. This was in northern New York, so spring got a little chilly at times. The main road we took stretched about 35 miles and was nothing but cornfields and tree lines. We hit a stretch of road that was super foggy, for no reason, so my mum slowed down to a proper speed. We finally reached the end of the fog, and we looked to the left to see where we were. About 50 yards from the road was a man and woman in what appeared to be wedding clothes from at least 100 years ago. A man wearing a big top hat and the woman wearing a very old-looking white dress holding hands with their back to us walking towards the wood line. We drove past and I remember the silence in the car until my mum said, "What the hell was that?" Till this day, whenever we get together and one of us tells the story, we all get goosebumps. I was driving near Las Vegas at around 3 a.m. I had been following a few black SUVs along the highway for a good hour or so. They had Nevada plates that were single-digit numbers in order, 1, 2, 3. Suddenly they all pulled off the highway down a dirt path. There was no... The rabbits near where I live all get something that we call mixie or myxomatosis. It's where they go deaf and blind and just wander onto the roads to promptly get killed. We did a sponsored walk with my school at the time, and it happened. We all walked along this long road that was stained red with blood for miles and strewn with literally hundreds, maybe thousands of pulverized rabbits. Nobody said a word the entire time, and all that you could hear were the sobs of younger kids. Except for that one moment where it turned to them shrieking. 2 live infected rabbits had basically exploded under a passing car. It was pretty bleak and yet memorable stuff. Sometime during late autumn, a long time ago, my dad's buddy was driving to work early in the morning. It was very early and almost pitch black. He drove through a small forest as usual. When he turned a corner, he saw a corpse hanging off a tree right above the road. Some guy decided to off himself, and this poor factory worker was the one who found him first, alone in the dark, hanging 1 to 2 meters off the ground, illuminated only by the headlights of the car. Needless to say, he called the cops and went home ASAP. He had to go to therapy to overcome how traumatic that event was. In South Africa, we have a lot of hijacking, and for a while, the favored method to stop cars was to play dead in the road. Of course, it doesn't take long for people to figure out that stopping to help people on the road is a bad idea, and that is where my friend of a friend joins the story. On his way home from work one night, he lived on a small holding. He sees a body in the road about 1 kilometer from his house. He quickly realized what was up and decided to just drive up onto the pavement and go around the body without stopping. He got home about 2 minutes later, ran inside and called the police when he saw them coming down the road. He returned to where he had seen the body to tell them where they start their search. Obviously there was no body, but what they did find was quite surprising. 3 dead hijackers hiding in the long grass on the curb. As it turns out, when he had driven up on the curb to avoid the dead guy, he had crushed all of the accomplices. The quote-unquote dead guy was never found, as far as I know. This happened to my girlfriend last night. We had been camping for 4 days, and were leaving on the 5th, but my girlfriend had to leave the night before because of work. I told her to drive safe because I was pretty worried about her hitting a deer. She drives a little Volkswagen Bug, so I knew if she'd hit something it wouldn't go over too well. Around 45 minutes later, she shot me a call and told me about something that happened to her while she was driving. She was driving down a straight stretch of road with no side roads going off it, just forest. While she was driving, she saw headlights pop up behind her, which was odd enough since there were no roads for it to turn off of. Even more odd, the headlights drove up to 60 miles an hour and caught her in around 4 seconds. She said she was listening to a song that had a countdown, so that's how she could tell. Now she was a little sketched out, so she sped up a bit, but it kept following. The headlights pulled up next to her, but she said she didn't see a car, but a silhouette of someone running. She slammed on her brakes and went down to around 20, where the headlights followed the road for a bit before veering off the road into the forest. When she sped back up to that part of the woods, she didn't see any light or anything. Now this really freaked her out, to the point she wanted to stop talking about it, but said her dad had experienced something similar and said it could be a skinwalker. I've never really believed in that kind of thing, so what could explain her experience? And if it could have been something like a skinwalker or a spirit, why did it pretend to be a car? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's road trip stories. They really were quite memorable, in my opinion. Especially the barn one. Well, a number of them, in fact. The barn one was pretty good, though. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to let me know. Drop a like, leave a comment. It is always very much appreciated. And if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and press the little bell icon for new posts every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'd like to also extend a huge extra thank you to my members and patrons, whose support is invaluable, as well as my coffee supporters whose names are on screen. If you'd like your name on screen and a host of other perks, you can check out my Patreon and coffee and membership stuff. Yeah, I really hope you liked today's stories. It was fun. I really like driving stories. I know a lot of you guys really like them too, so I'll be seeing you in the comments soon, hopefully. But yeah, it's been fun. But for now, I'm going to wish you all a very pleasant night, so stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.